My name is Camryn Blake. I'm 29 years old, and until last month, I was living a quiet, intentional life in Seattle, painting full-time, managing small exhibitions, and keeping as much emotional distance from my family in Charlotte as I could. But everything changed when I got the call. My father, Everett Blake, had died of a heart attack. And suddenly, the life I'd built felt like it was standing on shaky ground. That's how I found myself alone in the last pew of St. John's Cathedral, watching my family from a distance as they whispered and glanced sideways at me. Everyone was dressed in perfect Southern black, tailored suits, pearls, lace gloves. I wore a simple black dress and a long coat, my hair still damp from the rain. I had flown in that morning and hadn't had time to change. I didn't think I needed to impress anyone. I was wrong. The first dagger came from my older brother, Bryce. As the organ music faded, he turned and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Did she really think she'd get anything by just showing up?" Then louder, to the whole room, "She's just here for the money. Dad's going to cut her off." Some of my cousins chuckled. Aunt Miriam didn't even flinch, just sipped from her glass of water like it was communion wine. I wanted to walk out. Every inch of me wanted to flee that church and catch the next flight home. But I stayed, because this wasn't for them. It was for Dad. And even now, even after everything, I still loved him. Growing up, I was Dad's little shadow. When I was 8, he used to wake me up before dawn and take me on fishing trips to Lake Norman. "The early bird catches the fish, Cam," he'd whisper, grinning as he poured hot coffee into his thermos and tucked my sketchbook into the tackle box. He always made time for me, no matter how busy things got with Blake Urban Holdings. Back then, it was just a modest construction company, but Everett Blake turned it into one of the biggest real estate firms in the Southeast. Luxury condos, eco-office parks, revitalized warehouses. People called him the visionary of Charlotte. I just called him Dad. Things shifted when I hit 17. While Bryce was shadowing Dad at site inspections and reading Forbes at the dinner table, I was winning art competitions, experimenting with oil paints, and talking about the Rhode Island School of Design like it was my personal mecca. When my acceptance letter came in, I thought Dad would be proud. Instead, he pulled me into his study, shut the door, and stared at the letter like it was an obituary. "Art isn't a career," he said, voice low and clipped. "It's a hobby. You have a guaranteed future here. A stake in something real." "And what if I want to build something real of my own?" I'd snapped. It was the first real argument we ever had. It wouldn't be the last. Bryce took full advantage of the rift. Over time, he positioned himself as the dutiful child, the heir, the one who wouldn't disappoint. He made sure everyone knew I had abandoned the family legacy. He'd make cutting remarks in front of relatives, always wrapped in sugar but sharp enough to wound. "She's finding herself in Seattle," he'd say with a smirk at Christmas one year. "Lots of paint, not much profit." I tried. I really did. I called on birthdays, sent holiday cards, even invited Dad to my gallery openings, but I never got a reply. I thought maybe he was too busy, or maybe I'd hurt him more than I realized. Now I know the truth was worse. At the funeral reception, Bryce held court like he was already the new king of the Blake family. Aunt Miriam stood at his side, tall and smug in her black satin gloves. I stayed near the window, sipping cold coffee, trying to stay invisible. It didn't work. "You must be thrilled, Camryn," Bryce said, appearing beside me with 2 cousins flanking him like security. "All this attention. Must be nice to show up after 5 years and act like family again." "I came to say goodbye to Dad," I replied, forcing my voice to stay level. "Sure," he sneered. "Not like you were there when he collapsed on the patio, or when he needed someone to drive him to his cardiologist. But now that there's a will to read, here you are." A few people turned to look. I could feel their judgment crawling up my spine. I never stopped caring, I said quietly. You made it impossible to be close to him. Bryce leaned in. You gave up your place in this family the day you chose a paintbrush over the Blake legacy. And tomorrow? When Gordon reads the will, you're going to realize just how badly you miscalculated. I stared at him. We'll see. He smiled then, a cruel, condescending curve of his lips. Yeah, we will. That night, back at my hotel, I couldn't sleep. My best friend Leah called from Seattle. I'm sorry I couldn't come with you, she said. How bad was it? Worse than I imagined, I whispered. They all hate me. They think I came for a payout. Let them think whatever they want, she said firmly. You came to say goodbye. That's what matters. I lay there for hours, replaying every conversation, every look, every half smile that carried a blade beneath it. I didn't expect anything from the will, but I needed the truth. One way or another, I'd face it tomorrow. The morning after the funeral, I walked to a quiet cafe near the hotel, ordered a tea I didn't touch, and stared at the rain streaking down the window. Charlotte felt unfamiliar and suffocating. I'd grown up here, but now every corner of the city reminded me of who I used to be, and how far I'd fallen in their eyes. After Dad died, I hadn't even heard from Bryce directly. It was Gordon Tate, our longtime family attorney, who called me from a blocked number. Camryn, he'd said, voice heavy with hesitation. Your father passed sometime during the night. The housekeeper found him in his study. I thought you should hear it from someone who knew both of you. I remember clutching the phone, barely able to breathe. Bryce didn't call me? A pause. He asked me to. That was all I needed to know. After I got off the phone with Gordon, I called Bryce. He didn't answer. Not the first time. Not the second. Finally, on the fourth try, he picked up. What do you want, Camryn? He snapped. I wanted to talk to you about Dad. I'm handling it, he said curtly. The funeral's set for Friday, St. John's. Don't cause a scene. I'm not here to cause anything, I said, my voice catching. I just want to say goodbye. Then come to the funeral and leave quietly. I should have known then what I was walking into. The night before the funeral, they held a private family gathering at the estate. I didn't get an invitation. My childhood home, once filled with warm Sunday dinners, paint-stained fingers, and the scent of Dad's cologne, was now occupied by people who had already written me out of the story. Cousins, aunts, business associates. Not one reached out. Not even a text. I stayed in my hotel room and watched old videos of me and Dad fishing when I was 10. His voice echoed through the speaker. Cast further, Cam. Sometimes what you want is just out of reach. You've got to go after it. I never imagined he'd stop reaching back. When I arrived at the funeral the next morning, I was early. Still, the front pews were already full. Bryce sat front and center, next to Aunt Miriam, surrounded by board members of Blake Urban Holdings. They didn't even glance my way. I found a seat in the middle row. Alone. Again. The service was beautiful. Polished. Scripted. Just like everything in my family. The priest spoke of Everett Blake, the businessman, the visionary, the community leader, the devoted father. He glanced meaningfully at Bryce as he said that last part. Then Bryce stood to give the eulogy. Dad believed in loyalty, he said, voice carefully modulated for the microphone. He taught me that family meant showing up, doing the hard work, and building something to be proud of. I already knew where this was going. Some people chose other paths, he added, looking directly at me. They walked away. But Dad and I stayed true to the legacy. Gasps, whispers. Even the priest looked uncomfortable. I kept my head high. Let them see my face. Let them feel the weight of what they'd all allowed. After the service, the reception unfolded in the church hall with soft music, finger food, and people tiptoeing around me like I was a ghost. A few offered hollow condolences. Others didn't bother. I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when Bryce appeared again, flanked by our cousins Trevor and Elise. "Still here?" he asked. "I have every right to be here." "Really?" His smirk returned. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like a stranger trying to crash a family event." "Bryce, enough," I warned, keeping my voice low. "You left," he said louder. "Dad was sick. You didn't care. You missed everything important. Now you think showing up earns you a share of what he built?" I felt my hands tremble, but I wouldn't let them see me falter. "You know that's not why I came." "Do I?" he challenged, stepping closer. "Because everyone here seems to agree. You're just waiting to see what's in the will." Around us, conversations quieted. All eyes turned. I took a slow breath. He was my father, too. Bryce leaned in close. "Well, we'll see if he remembered that when it mattered." I left the reception early, not out of weakness but necessity. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the weight of years of absence and misunderstanding was crushing. Back at the hotel, I called Leah again. "They ambushed me," I whispered. "Publicly." "I'm so sorry, Cam," she said. "You don't deserve this. I think they've already decided what Dad thought of me, and tomorrow, at the will reading, they'll get to make it official." "What are you expecting?" "Nothing," I said. "I truly don't expect anything, but if he left me a letter, even just a note." My voice cracked. "I just want to know he didn't hate me at the end." "You don't need their validation," she said, "but I hope you get that note." "So do I." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, thinking about all the letters I'd sent over the years, the voicemails, the gallery invitations, the small, desperate attempts to keep some thread between us alive, and how every one of those attempts had been ignored, or so I thought. I replayed our final phone call in my mind, the one where Dad had sounded so distant, cold. He hadn't even congratulated me when my work was featured in Art and Form magazine. Instead, he mentioned Bryce closing a huge commercial deal. Now I wondered, what if there was more to that call? What if I wasn't the only one who had been kept in the dark? The thought struck me like a crack of thunder. But I'd find out soon enough. The next morning, I got dressed deliberately. Simple black dress, soft gray coat, a pendant Dad gave me when I turned 16. I pulled my hair back and took a long breath in the mirror. "You're not here for revenge," I told my reflection. "You're here for the truth." I left the hotel with no expectations. I was prepared to be erased, officially and permanently, from Everett Blake's legacy. But what I found waiting at that law firm would change everything. The law offices of Tate & Jenkins were located on the top floor of one of Blake Urban Holdings' most prestigious towers. Ironically, one of the buildings I used to sketch from a distance when I was a teenager. Back then, I called it Dad's Castle. Walking into it now, with its glass and marble lobby and discreet security guards, felt like trespassing in a place that once should have been mine. I stepped into the private conference room just before 10 a.m. It was already crowded. My brother Bryce sat at the head of the long table, legs crossed confidently, flanked by Aunt Miriam and two board members I recognized from press photos. Everyone was dressed like this was a board meeting, not a final goodbye. As I entered, the conversation paused. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. Bryce raised a brow, then gestured toward an empty chair at the far end of the table. "Well, look who decided to show up. We saved you a seat. Way down there." I walked silently to the chair and sat. Let them think I was out of place. Let them gloat. This wasn't about them. This was about my father. At exactly 10 a.m., Gordon Tate entered, dressed in a crisp navy suit and carrying his signature leather briefcase. His gray hair was combed neatly, but his eyes looked heavier than I remembered. Age, maybe. Or something else. He scanned the room, then met my gaze and gave me a small, warm nod. Camryn, thank you for coming. He walked to the center of the table and placed his briefcase in front of him. I'd like to begin by expressing my condolences, he said quietly. Everett Blake was not only my client for over 30 years, he was also a dear friend. His passing is deeply felt. There were murmurs around the table, some sincere, some just noise. Then Gordon opened his briefcase and withdrew a slim folder and a small black USB drive. He left very specific instructions regarding the reading of his final will, Gordon continued. As part of those instructions, Mr. Blake prepared a personal video message to be viewed before we discussed the legal provisions of the estate. A silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. Video message? Bryce repeated, clearly caught off guard. He never mentioned that to me. That's correct, Gordon said evenly. He recorded it in private about 3 months ago. His request was explicit. It must be viewed in full before any legal reading occurs. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Why would Dad need to record a video? Aunt Miriam asked, her smile strained. To speak directly, Gordon replied, to make things clear. A paralegal rolled in a projector cart and set up a laptop at the far end of the table. The USB was inserted. The lights were dimmed. The screen flickered. And there he was, Everett Blake, my father, alive on screen. He sat in his home office wearing his favorite navy blazer and pale blue shirt, his silver hair combed back, hands folded on the desk. His eyes looked tired but steady. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Hello, everyone, Dad began, his voice even and familiar. If you're seeing this, it means I'm no longer with you, and I'm sorry for that. I had hoped to share some of these words in person, but time doesn't always wait. The room was still. Bryce shifted in his seat, arms crossed. Aunt Miriam looked visibly unsettled. I've spent my life building something I was proud of, Dad continued. A company, a reputation, a family. But in the past few years, I've come to realize that not everything was as it seemed, that people I trusted may not have been worthy of that trust, and that others, whom I doubted, deserved far more than I gave them. His eyes seemed to focus on me, even through the screen. This message, he said, is about truth, about legacy, and about correcting a terrible mistake. I could hear Bryce's breathing shift beside me, growing shallower. His posture, once smug and assured, was beginning to crack. I want to begin by speaking directly to my daughter, Dad said, his voice softening. Camryn, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. My chest tightened. I felt tears prick my eyes. I'm sorry for the distance. I'm sorry for not understanding your choices. Most of all, I'm sorry for believing lies that kept us apart. A collective murmur rolled through the room. You see, several months ago, I experienced another health scare. My doctors told me to slow down, so I did. And during that time, I discovered something that shook me to my core. He paused, then held up a small stack of cards in his hand. Camryn, these are your letters. Birthday cards. Notes. Invitations to your exhibitions. I found them hidden in Bryce's home office. All unopened. All deliberately kept from me. There was a collective inhale, sharp, involuntary. I didn't understand at first, so I looked deeper, and what I found broke my heart. Dad leaned slightly forward on screen. I hired a private investigator. Quietly. I needed to know how deep it went. Turns out Bryce had been intercepting calls, deleting voicemails, and even replying to your messages as if he were me. He made sure we stayed estranged, and I let it happen. All eyes turned to Bryce. His face had gone ghost white. That discovery forced me to reevaluate everything, not just our relationship, Camryn, but the future of the company. He paused again, lifting a second folder into view. The investigator found other things: financial records, forged inspection reports, payments to expedite permits. Bryce had compromised the values I built this company on. He used my name to cut corners. A board member whispered something to the CFO. Aunt Miriam was frozen, lips pressed into a tight line. Everett's voice grew firm. My father taught me that a Blake property meant something, that we didn't take shortcuts, that our word was our bond. Bryce, you broke that. He turned back to the camera. Camryn, in contrast, you lived your values. You created something from nothing. Your art, your reputation, your work ethic, they reflect what I always hoped the Blake name would mean. I could hardly breathe. I wanted to cry, to scream, to freeze this moment forever. He believed me. He saw me. Then came the final turn. As a result, Dad said clearly, I've revised my will. Bryce, you will receive a conditional cash inheritance contingent upon your cooperation with the ethics review and completion of a corporate responsibility program. Bryce shot to his feet. This is insane. He was... Sit down, Gordon snapped, his voice like a whip. Camryn, Dad continued, you will inherit the family home, my private investment portfolio, and a controlling 51% stake in Blake Urban Holdings. You may choose to lead the company or appoint someone to represent your interests. The choice will be yours. Gasps filled the room. I believe in your vision, he finished, and I believe you will protect what I nearly lost: my integrity, my legacy, my name. The screen faded to black. Silence. Bryce's chair scraped loudly against the marble floor as he stormed out, his fury uncontained. No one stopped him. And for the first time in years, no one looked at me like I didn't belong. When the screen went black, no one in that boardroom dared to speak first. You could feel the air shift. The smug certainty that had clung to Bryce like expensive cologne had evaporated. He was gone. He had stormed out without waiting for the formal reading, without looking at anyone, especially not me. And in that moment, the room was mine. Gordon Tate straightened the folder in front of him and cleared his throat. As Mr. Blake indicated, the written will corroborates what he just shared. There are also documents, recordings, and financial evidence prepared and notarized in the final weeks of his life. All of it supports the video testimony. He paused, then turned to me with the quiet authority of someone who had known my father better than most. Camryn, you are now the majority shareholder of Blake Urban Holdings. The words landed like thunder in my chest. Me, not the golden son, not the heir apparent. Me, the black sheep, the artist, the daughter who was supposed to be invisible. The room erupted into hushed side conversations. The two board members exchanged glances. Aunt Miriam, to my left, looked like she'd swallowed glass. She pressed her lips together so tightly the color drained from them. "But this is absurd!" she finally snapped. "Camryn doesn't know a thing about real estate. This company can't be run by someone who paints pictures for a living." Gordon didn't flinch. Mr. Blake anticipated that concern. He made it clear Camryn has the option to appoint a CEO or executive manager should she choose not to be directly involved in daily operations. However, she holds full authority over that decision. "She's going to sell it," Aunt Miriam hissed. "To the highest bidder. That's what this is." I turned to face her fully, my voice quiet but firm. "No, I'm not here to destroy anything. I'm here because he chose me, because he trusted me. And maybe that scares you, but it's the truth." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. After the meeting, Gordon motioned for me to stay behind. Everyone else filtered out slowly, some with side eyes, some in stunned silence. I stayed seated, unsure if I was dreaming. Gordon finally closed the door and sat across from me. "I wish Everett had lived long enough to tell you this himself," he said gently. "But he was proud of you, Camryn. Deeply." I swallowed hard, barely able to speak. Why didn't he ever call? Why didn't he say any of this when he was alive? "Because your brother didn't just sabotage the communication. He poisoned it," Gordon said. "Your father was blindsided when he found out. It broke him." My eyes filled with tears. "He told me," Gordon continued, "that the biggest regret of his life was not questioning Bryce sooner. When he found those letters, he cried." My voice cracked. "I thought he hated me." "He didn't," Gordon said. "He just forgot how to see you through his own eyes instead of your brother's." I nodded slowly, processing a truth I had waited nearly a decade to hear. That evening, I stood alone inside the house I had grown up in, now legally mine. It felt both familiar and foreign. The scent of mahogany and aged leather lingered in the air. My footsteps echoed against the marble floors. This was the house where I'd painted my first mural in the basement, where Dad used to make us pancakes on Sundays, where Mom's laughter had once filled the hallways before she passed. I wandered to Dad's office, drawn by instinct. The space looked untouched. His desk was still neatly arranged, his fountain pen capped, his planner closed. I opened the drawer on the right, the one Bryce had clearly avoided, and found something that made me sit down hard in the leather chair. Inside was a velvet folder labeled simply, "Camryn." I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were copies of my gallery flyers, newspaper clippings, photographs of my artwork printed from online sources. There was even a copy of my RISD diploma, framed. He'd kept it all. Even when he wasn't speaking to me, even when I thought I'd been erased, he was watching. He was proud. At the bottom of the folder was a worn leather-bound journal. It took me a moment to recognize it. Dad's private journal. The entries spanned years. I flipped through pages filled with blocky handwriting, reading snippets aloud. Camryn's new work was featured in a Seattle gallery. The brushwork reminds me of her mother. She always saw the world differently. Bryce says Camryn didn't return his messages. I wonder if that's true. Something feels off. Found her letters today. Hidden. Bryce. My God, what have I done? Each entry cut deeper than the last. The final page was dated 1 week before his death. Made arrangements to visit Camryn next month. Will see her work in person. Must change the will. I hope it's not too late to show her how much I believe in her. I closed the journal with shaking hands and pressed it to my chest. He had been trying to come back to me. The next day, I stood at the window of Dad's study, staring out over the city skyline. It no longer looked like a fortress I'd been locked out of. It looked like a canvas waiting for new colors. I wasn't naive. I knew running a company like Blake Urban Holdings wouldn't be easy. I'd already heard whispers that some senior staff were considering resigning. Some were loyal to Bryce. Others just didn't believe in me. But I also knew what Dad saw when he left it in my hands. Someone who led with integrity. Someone who had already built something from the ground up. Someone who didn't need to fit into his mold to carry on his legacy. Later that week, Gordon called to inform me that Bryce had formally hired an attorney to contest the will. I expected that, I said, exhausted but unsurprised. We're ready for it, Gordon assured me. Everett left behind detailed documentation, financial records, and a signed statement confirming his state of mind. We'll win this. Still, it hurt. He hadn't called. Not even a message. Just lawyers. And yet, somewhere deep down, I wasn't angry. I was free. Free from their narrative. Free from being the failure, the disappointment, the disgrace. Because now the truth had been spoken. And for the first time in years, I knew who I was. I didn't sleep much the night after I read my father's journal. The grief was fresh all over again, not just from losing him, but from realizing how close we'd come to repairing what was broken. He had planned to visit. He had wanted to see my life in Seattle, see my work with his own eyes. He had planned to tell me he was proud, and now he never could. But he'd left me something else, a legacy, a message, a company, and a choice. 2 days after the will reading, I held my first meeting with the executive team at Blake Urban Holdings. I didn't sit at the head of the table, yet. I chose a seat in the middle, among the people who would help me decide whether I had a real place here or not. I knew they were skeptical. I could see it in their eyes. Some stared at their notepads. Some barely looked up at all. So I stood. I'm not going to pretend I know everything about real estate, I began, steadying my voice. I didn't spend the last decade running site inspections or negotiating zoning permits. I've spent it running exhibitions, pitching galleries, building relationships with clients who didn't know my name 5 minutes earlier. A few heads raised. What I do know is how to build something from scratch. I know what it means to stand behind your work when no one believes in it, and I know how much integrity mattered to my father, which means it matters to me. Silence. Stillness. Then finally, one of the project leads. Marcus Tran nodded. Then let's see what you've got. Meanwhile, Bryce's silence spoke louder than any statement. Gordon told me he had retained counsel immediately after the video played but hadn't filed anything yet. I braced myself for war, but the war never came. Instead, after a week of blustering from his lawyers, Bryce withdrew his legal challenge. Gordon said it was likely because the evidence Dad left behind was too damning. Phone records, voicemail logs, financial audits. The receipts spoke louder than any testimony. And Bryce? He left the country, took an extended vacation, according to Aunt Miriam. Europe, maybe. Or hiding from the shame that finally caught up with him. Moving into the Blake estate felt surreal. The house, though massive and meticulously maintained, felt hollow. Too quiet. Too heavy. Still, I made space for myself. I converted one of the sunrooms into a small studio. I found my old art supplies boxed in the garage, dried paints, torn sketchbooks, a little ceramic vase I'd made in 6th grade still wrapped in newspaper. And I found something else. In the far back of Dad's study, behind a false panel in the bookcase, a place I remembered from childhood scavenger hunts, was a fireproof box. Inside were more prints of my artwork. Reviews. A handwritten list of upcoming shows in New York. Ticket stubs from one I hadn't known he'd attended. Even when I thought he'd shut me out, he had been watching. Quietly. Secretly. Like he was trying to stay connected from a distance he didn't know how to close. It broke my heart, but it also healed something in me. My first major test came quickly. The Madison Avenue project, the one Bryce had bragged about at the funeral, was mid-construction and under tight deadlines. Our internal audit, initiated right after I took over, revealed shortcuts, substandard insulation, low-quality wiring, and falsified inspection reports. All approved under Bryce's watch. Fixing the problems would delay the opening by 4 months and cost an additional $1.2 million. The board was split. Some argued we should push forward and correct it later. I refused. We do it right, I said. Even if we lose money now, we protect the name. That's what Dad would have done. That's what I will do. It was my first real act of leadership. Not flashy, not profitable, but honest. And slowly, the staff began to believe in me. Meanwhile, word began to spread. About the will. About the video. About Bryce's sabotage and sudden disappearance. It didn't take long before some of the very same family members who had laughed at me at the funeral started reaching out. The first was my cousin Elise. She sent a carefully worded email asking if we could meet for coffee. "I was misled," she wrote. "I think we all were." I met her at a quiet cafe near Uptown. She looked nervous, like she expected me to slap her with a cease and desist. "I'm sorry, Camryn," she said, before the drinks even arrived. "I believed Bryce. I believed everything he said about you." "I know," I replied simply. "I think I wanted to believe it," she added, her voice trembling. "It was easier than admitting we were wrong." I nodded. "You're not the only one." Other apologies followed. Some genuine, some half-hearted. Some transparently motivated by proximity to the company's new majority owner. I accepted the honest ones. I set boundaries with the others. I didn't need a dozen shallow relationships. I needed peace. Leah visited from Seattle that same week. We sat on the back porch of the Blake estate sipping wine under the Carolina moonlight. "You look different," she said. "How?" "Lighter, taller, like you're finally standing in your own story." I smiled. "I think I am." 6 months after the will reading, the Madison Avenue building reopened, this time with full compliance, stronger materials, and a reputation for quality. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I gave a short speech. "My father used to say that legacy isn't built in the boardroom. It's built in the choices we make when no one's watching." People clapped. And I felt him there, in the back of my mind. Silent, proud. After the ceremony, I visited the cemetery for the first time since the funeral. I brought a single sunflower, his favorite, and one of my newest paintings. A coastal skyline, inspired by our early fishing trips. I sat beside his grave and laid the painting down gently. "I hope I'm doing right by you," I whispered. "Not just as your daughter, but as the woman you finally saw." The breeze lifted my hair, and for a moment, it felt like he was answering. 6 months after I took control of Blake Urban Holdings, my life looked nothing like it had before. I was back in the city I thought I'd left behind forever, running the company I was once told I had no place in, and building a future out of the wreckage my brother had left behind. I won't lie, there were days I felt like I was in over my head. I'd lie awake at night reading zoning codes. I'd take calls with commercial contractors while reviewing art submissions for an upcoming gallery show. And I'd ask myself over and over, can I really do both? But slowly I stopped asking, because the answer was yes. I didn't have to choose between being the daughter my father once hoped I'd be and the artist I had become. I could be both. The Blake estate no longer felt haunted. I had opened the windows, repainted the walls, left canvases drying on the back patio. I kept Dad's study exactly as it was, but added one framed piece, my most recent painting, Carolina Reflection. The staff started to warm to me. My choices weren't always popular, but they were consistent. I held to my father's standards: quality, honesty, long-term thinking, and I added my own voice: creativity, community investment, and transparency. We implemented regular ethics reviews, created a whistleblower hotline, and started a leadership mentorship program focused on diversity and inclusion. I didn't just want to protect my father's name. I wanted to elevate it. 3 months after the Madison Avenue ribbon cutting, I stood in front of the press again. But this time, it wasn't about real estate. It was about art. We launched the Everett Blake Foundation for Arts Education, a nonprofit funded by a portion of company profits, focused on bringing arts programming into underserved schools across North Carolina. Our first initiative was to supply 10 public schools in the Charlotte area with full-time art teachers, supplies, and curriculum support. At the launch gala, I gave a speech in front of a mixed audience of developers, artists, educators, and former critics. "My father believed in building structures," I said. "I believe in building vision, and both begin with a blank canvas." I saw a few eyes well with tears, including Gordon Tate's. He walked up to me afterward with a glass of champagne in one hand and the ghost of a smile on his face. "You've done it, Camryn," he said. "You've honored his name without losing your own." I received a letter from Bryce shortly after. It was postmarked from Amsterdam. No return address. The handwriting on the envelope was still neat, still arrogant. Inside, a single sentence. "You took everything." I folded the paper and set it in a drawer. I didn't need to respond. He wasn't looking for dialogue. He was looking for pity. And I didn't have any left for him. I used to think I needed his approval to feel whole. But I'd been living in the shadow of his manipulation for so long, I'd forgotten what the light felt like. Now I was finally standing in it. Some family members remained distant. Others began to show up again, some sincerely, others opportunistically. Cousin Elise invited me to her daughter's birthday party. Uncle Ron sent a polite invitation to a summer barbecue. Aunt Miriam? She remained silent. I was okay with that. I had learned the difference between family and relatives. The night before our first foundation exhibition, I wandered through the new gallery space downtown. It had once been a textile factory. My father had nearly torn it down years ago for condos. Now it was home to the Blake Collective, a rotating space for emerging artists and community workshops. The walls were covered in color. One section featured the works of local high school students. Bold, raw, beautiful. Another showcased my newest series, Legacies Reclaimed, 6 paintings inspired by memory, grief, and rising from exclusion. One of them, Inheritance Interrupted, had already been requested for national display. I sat on a bench and looked around. This was mine. Not just the company, not just the title, but the impact, the truth, the story. The next morning, I visited my father's grave again. A quiet tradition I had started once a month. This time, I brought a single lily and a hand-sized sculpture of a brush carved from oak, my small tribute to him and the merging of our two worlds. "Hi, Dad," I said softly, brushing some leaves from the edge of the headstone. "We launched the foundation last night. The kids were amazing. You'd be proud." I paused. "I read your journal again. I think about what you said, about how you wished you could have told me all this in person." I looked out at the line of trees behind the cemetery. The sky was soft blue, the way it only is in early spring. "You didn't have to. You already did." As I stood to leave, I whispered one last thing. "Thank you. For seeing me. For choosing me. For believing in me. Even when I didn't believe in myself." Then I walked back to the car, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. Running Blake Urban Holdings isn't easy. There are still skeptics, still long hours, still nights when I feel like I'm juggling two worlds. But every time I walk into a boardroom or a gallery, I remember what Dad said in his video. Integrity should never be complicated. It's either there or it isn't. That's how I run the company. That's how I live my life. To anyone watching this who's ever been cast out, underestimated, or dismissed by your own family, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not defined by their acceptance. Your truth doesn't require their permission. And sometimes, the legacy they tried to bury becomes the platform you rise from. Thank you for being here. If this story meant something to you, please like, comment, and subscribe. And always remember, the truth always finds its way to the surface, even when the people around you try to keep it buried.